welcome back to the World Lens podcast. I am your host, Michelle Evans, and today I am joined by the big B himself, Bruce McIndoe. Hey, Bruce, how's it doing?
Oh, never a dull moment. That all good.
Never a dull moment. So, this is the last episode of the World Lens for the season. Yay. That means we're going to take some time to, relax, go to the beach, travel like you always do. But we'll be back towards the end of the summer with more insights and a look at what some of the WTCI member companies are up to. But since we're about to head out, I think it's a good idea that we kind of look back at the topics that we've covered over the past few months, see what's changed, where things stand. Sound good?
Sounds good. And when we're done, it'll be clear there'll be no summer break or vacation for me.
I'm sorry.
Lots going on.
All right, so let's start with this classic TikTok. Despite the multiple deadlines or to ban it and sell the app in the US, I still have access to TikTok on my phone. Neither has happened. What's going on?
Oh, good old TikTok. Well, let's
I
say
know.
that the third time isn't a charm for TikTok, as you know, they had the deadline for the second extension. Now they have another 90-day extension to September 17th, so right after Labor Day,
Mm-hmm.
and are left with still an uncertain future for them and all of their users. So that's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
There was a CBS News report, as I was kind of looking at like where are we in the process of a U.S. company acquiring TikTok, which is the
Right.
hurdle. And there was a report that Amazon had put in a last minute offer to the White House to
I
acquire
did
them.
see
So that
that.
was interesting. But there's a long list of investors and investor groups, vying for the company, and so we'll see. I don't know. These kinds of deals don't happen in 90 days.
Right.
So I'm sure we'll be running up against this deadline after the summer break. But the big hurdle that exists and was present since the beginning, and that is, whether China is going to sign off on any deal that we come up with. So I
Mm-hmm.
would say at this point, there's no end in sight. And I guess in putting a flag in the ground, this is really a bit shocking to me that we had a bipartisan backed law signed by, of course, the former president, but it's
Mm-hmm.
been upheld by the Supreme Court and it's being treated like I don't know, a mere suggestion by the White House. And, can Trump continue to just push this down with executive action? Well, he seems to be a master at executive action, so I guess potentially, but it just seems to me like we're going to get to this deadline and there's going to be so much chaotic political
Mm-hmm.
background noise that we'll just keep kicking the can down the road.
Basically.
Hmm.
And Florida's attempt to ban social media use for children under 14, it's also been caught
Hmm.
up in court. Does it look like this ban will ever be implemented?
Yeah, this is actually one that's kind of near and dear to my heart as I work with workforce development, primarily
Mm-hmm.
in the cyber space, but also as a trustee at a college. And I'm a a big proponent that we need to wean our kids, especially children, kind of off devices.
Mm-hmm.
So, does this ban look like it's going to be implemented? I think for Florida, it will.
Okay.
We're seeing some things happening elsewhere. I think fundamentally, and this is estimate, I don't know specifically, but around 65% of parents support a bell to bell ban of devices in the school or at
Mm-hmm.
least during class time. So it
That
is
makes
a
sense.
so and then you have a whole series of states, Virginia and I don't know, California,
Yeah.
Louisiana, that have all enacted measures. So I do see momentum, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that it will ultimately be enacted and and have some level of restriction.
Yeah. And well, the UK is kind of taking a different approach.
Hmm.
They're considering time caps and curfews for the social media apps for the kids. Do you think that this is a more realistic approach to regulating it, or is it more of the same that we see happening in Florida and Georgia?
Well, Florida and this is different, right? Because this Florida and the other states are focused on use of phones in the school, right? And
Mm-hmm.
parents arguing that they don't want their kids untethered because of a million reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there's this compromise. So, like, okay, they cannot use them in the classroom. Well, that seems like that would be basic. But what the UK government is talking about is actually 24/7, right? So this is on the child's, independent time outside of school, limiting
Right.
how much time they can spend on social media. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's a tough thing. I actually think that's more important.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, I was out to dinner just this last weekend, and next to us was a family of four with two children, I don't know, 7, 12 years old range, and all four had their faces buried in their phone, sitting there at dinner saying nothing, just, buried in their phone. That to me, it's just sad, right? I just see it as detrimental in so many ways. So,
It's a common
you know,
occurrence.
yeah, and so I guess, limiting their use, sure, when it's up to the kids and the adults around kids, they'll find ways to work around it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, you can say that's what you want to do. You can put some controls in, but just like buying beer in high school, it's going to happen. So,
Yeah.
so,
Well, since we're talking about social media,
uh-huh.
this new issue, the Trump administration is looking to vet the social media accounts of international student visa applicants. How does something like that not violate their First Amendment rights?
Yeah, and this is something I'm also deeply engaged in professionally as well as through the education
Mm-hmm.
system. So as I always, tell my clients when I've been briefing them on this, the bottom line, if you're not a US citizen, then you have no First Amendment rights, period.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this is in fact kind of whether the applicants are providing information, for the visa process or participating in visa vetting interviews or
Mm-hmm.
whether they ultimately present themselves at a port of entry to the US, they have no rights. So
Mm-hmm.
if they fail to comply, or there's any kind of reason that the government comes up with to deny, they can be turned away, either physically at the border or they won't get a visa. So, kind of my interactions and the kind of back to the business part of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that as I'm interacting in the travel industry and businesses, this is the primary cause of the reason that the US has seen a significant decline in international inbound travel. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, the WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council, the US stands alone among the 184 economies that they monitor to see a decline in international visitor spending. And for us, that's going to be like, I don't know, around $12 billion or 23% of our previous peak. This
Mm-hmm.
is bad for the tourism industry, for local
Yeah.
economies, for jobs, right? So all of this cascades, from the individuals, really problematic, but more importantly to our economy and our workers.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, this is based on the assumption that international students still want to come here, even with those restrictions.
Yeah.
Um, but is this something that the Trump administration, like, can they actually do this? Is this something that they can do?
Yes, they can, and they are doing it. And unfortunately, it's causing a lot of damage, and that damage has already been done.
Yeah,
Between this whole vetting situation and the State Department, as you may recall, paused visa interviews and was
right.
canceling visas, for example, for Chinese students. So much uncertainty that this is right now, and and again, I'm a trustee at a college. Right now, this is when colleges are working aggressively to finalize their entering class for the fall. That right now is what determines, does that university of college make money or struggle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just a really poor timing, and I see already from my perspective, working with a college, that it has absolutely impacted admits and, more importantly, deposits from
Mm-hmm.
international students.
Can't mess with the money.
It's painful.
So, we're already talking about the Trump administration as we have over the last few months because of his new policies, and he's been in office for what, 6 months now. Um, Greenland and the
Not
Panama
6 months.
Canal. Greenland and the Panama Canal haven't been annexed by the U.S., nor has Canada become the 51st state. What's happening with that behind the scenes? I haven't seen too much more about it. Are they still trying to take over these places?
Well, this is a kind of the classic environment that we're in right now, is that there's so much kind of noise in the channel,
Yeah.
right? The political channel, that a lot of things just don't break through. There is a lot going on behind the scenes
Mm-hmm.
around these. I would say Greenland number one, Panama number two, and Canada is, kind of a dream. But still, they are, you know, there. I mean, I've heard and been listening in on some webinars and things around like strategies to work through the Greenland issue. Because we would need to invade a NATO ally, if we were going to go
Right.
take it over with force. So that's silly. So they're trying to, think about how this might work. But I don't know if you remember just a few weeks ago that Vice President J.D. Vance, when was that? I guess March, um, you know, it could be a real indicator about, what's going on, because when he went there, he didn't
Mm-hmm.
meet with any government officials. He delivered this like bellicose speech about, accusing the Danish government of doing a poor job defending the territory, blah blah blah. So he's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
setting up this pretext that, hey, 57,000 Greenlanders, you should not be happy with Denmark, and you really need to come over to the U.S. side,
Mm-hmm.
willingly. So anyway, so that's still out there. Panama Canal is very focused on, and they made some headway right out the gate relative to China and its involvement and control of both entrances to the canal, both sides. So,
Mm-hmm.
and Canada, we saw what happened with their prime minister and that kind of stuff. So it's there. It's just right now, just not getting the attention because of all the other like significantly more attentive issues.
Yeah, definitely in Illinois, like you said.
Hmm.
I want to shift gears to these tariffs. I actually spoke with tariffs with Alex Koff, a partner at Venable,
Hmm.
and at this point, I feel like there's a new tariff or a pause every other week. What's going on? Last I checked, China was paused at 30%. There's a low number of containers coming into the U.S. Where do things stand now?
Well, the song, "You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet," right?
The
So
chaos is here to
I don't even
stay.
know if I want to quote any tariff percentages, because that'll change tomorrow, but
All right.
doesn't age well. Um, so let's look back at the macro level. President Trump needs, quote unquote, a win, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
created it hard to get a win when you're basically trying to negotiate in parallel with, I don't know, 80, 100 countries or more,
Mm-hmm.
even ones that just have penguins.
Yeah.
But anyway, um, if you start looking at where he sits right now, he had these campaign promises like, end the war in Ukraine on or before day one, right? End the war in
Right.
Gaza, making the government more efficient, eliminating the education department, and on and on and on. Of course, he can still deliver on some of these, but that, the ones where he had deadlines have long
Mm-hmm.
passed, right?
Right.
So trade deficits, addressing trade deficits and tariff revenue are kind of signature Trump initiatives. So he's got to make good on these. And he was hugely or bigly annoyed when people labeled him the taco president on trade, right? That is, Trump always chickens out because he was ever doing things kind of, unilaterally. So
Yeah.
that's, where we are right now, that he's got to make good on this.
Mm-hmm. So, we spent some time talking about the vibes a few weeks ago. How are you feeling right now with the vibes, with all the tariff uncertainty and everything with the trade?
Well, I the tariffs to me is just like a kind of a background noise.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're seeing a lot of pressure on Trump primarily, and then obviously his the people that are around him, where when you start having a flood of CEOs and business owners and economists that are telling him that this is disastrous for the country, including
Yeah.
immigration. When you look at the farmers and the what was it, the tourism, and where he's starting to talk about carve outs for them because the farmers are basically saying we're not going to be able to like pick fields if we don't have workers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you and the country won't have food. So so these are, I would say, big issues, and that's domestically. And then you start adding in with, Israel, Iran, and
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in Ukraine still, and on and on. I think the last report I saw a few weeks ago that there's 43 kinetic actions, i.e., wars, going on around the planet right now, right? So, um, I guess, there's that best picture. What was it called? Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah,
I
that
think
movie's
that
actually
that's,
pretty great.
pretty appropriate for these times. It's like I see a lot of bumps and a lot of potholes on the road ahead. I'm hopeful that we will see more of a balance of power between Congress and the executive branch after the midterms. And,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want a shift where the Democrats now have full control, and they won't because Trump's not going anywhere. So even if they did get some control of Congress where they still had to negotiate with the Republicans, then I can see a path forward where Congress can go back to doing their job, right? And like debating and compromising and making
Mm-hmm.
laws, and not just kind of rubber stamping the executive branch's initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm still sanguine about where we are, and I see
Mm-hmm.
all of the things that are in front of us, but I am hopeful that, the country's going to pull itself up and see that this is not a good model. Rebalance things so we have a model that works, that is in tension but getting
Mm-hmm.
resolution through negotiation and bipartisan work, and get this country back on track and make it great again.
So, similar to this conversation, we talked about de-dollarization. Um,
Hmm.
we mentioned that it would take decades, and some pundits agreed. But with BRICS expanding and dozens of other countries joining the dollar alternative push, is the timeline for de-dollarization actually accelerating?
Yeah, this is actually a critical and major kind of issue for our country, for the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I think what's transpired over the last, since January 20th, I would say that it's not only accelerating, but it's very likely to actually fragment. So let me kind of walk through. So let's start with the BRICS, right? So this is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? But there's actually
Mm-hmm.
BRICS plus, right? It's actually a bigger group. So in this period that they've been working this, they've reduced dollar usage in trade to approximately one third of its previous level. So
Yeah.
they've already made substantial gains in working through what's called BRICS Pay so that they facilitate transactions in their local currencies
Mm-hmm.
and then essentially eliminate dependence on the US dollar and Western payment systems like SWIFT to do that. So they're aggressively heading in that direction. They did try to discuss a common BRICS currency, but they put
Mm-hmm.
that on hold and are focusing on strengthening trade in the local currencies, which they're doing. So that's where that's going. And then I guess on the counterweight to that is what might hinder that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the hindrance, the number one issue is that 90% of all currency trading on the planet is in US dollar, right? So
Mm-hmm.
shifting from that is going to take a lot of time. The other challenge that we have is that, the US dollar and the US economy has been such a stalwart since World War II that
Mm-hmm.
it's very stable, whereas the BRICS all have very different economic profiles, right? It makes it really difficult to implement a kind of a unified monetary policy or and obviously even a currency when there's the competing interests even within that group. And then of course, so Trump comes in with his political pressure saying, if you guys, replace the U.S. dollar, then I'm going to throw on a 100% tariff on each of you, blah blah blah,
Right.
right? So that's out there. So I would say, here's the backdrop: if the U.S. remains on its current path and
Mm-hmm.
the expected significant increase in our national debt, assuming that depending on what they do with government budgets and that kind of stuff, we're going to see an acceleration, I think, to multiple trading blocks like BRICS. And so we'll actually end up dealing with, multiple economic blocks that people doing international trade now, instead of just doing it on the dollar, might have to do it in the RMB, with China or with Latin America. And I also see, because of this currency issue, potentially some or all of them moving to a cryptocurrency as a trading currency. So this is a huge issue, one that will, has, kind of major impact to our businesses that trade and work globally. And right now it's on a path to to hurt us, not help us.
Oh man.
I know.
that's a that's a lot.
Is that you crying?
It sounds like it, yes.
Yeah.
So hold on one second. My son is having a conniption. All right.
I think
I'm gonna
everybody
pick back
listening
up.
is having a conniption.
Yeah. So I'll be remiss if we didn't mention what just happened with the strikes in Iran. You mentioned off air earlier that this situation is far from over. Even with Trump announcing a U.S. brokered ceasefire and both sides already complaining of violations, it feels like we're watching more like a temporary pause than an actual solution. Can you
Hmm.
elaborate on why this whole situation is a whole lot more fragile than it appears?
It starts with, I think, that the ceasefire was a figment of President Trump's imagination.
I agree.
So there you go. They're right out the gate, right? Even the parties involved can't agree on when it actually started. So there's already been complaints about, you know, breaching the ceasefire, and there's like no terms. So nobody actually knows what was agreed to for them on the ceasefire. So essentially, there's not a ceasefire. And I've listened to a couple of people that I value, their position, talking about, this
Hmm.
strategy, that strategy, what's going to happen. Here's my take on it, just cutting to the chase. Bibi Netanyahu's Israel is not
Hmm.
going to let this go, period.
Yeah.
He will proceed. There's not going to be like, oh, let's reduce the sanctions and let's get to the negotiating table or whatever. He wants verifiable elimination of Iran's capability to build nuclear weapons and deploy them, period.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the likely next move for Israel is to make a move to eliminate, Khomeini, and force essentially a new leadership team to come to the table to discuss their future,
Mm-hmm.
and i.e. regime change, right? So I just feel like that's everything else is protracted, uncertain. Did they move some of this and hide it away, and then they can just start a new secret
Mm-hmm.
nuclear program? And Israel doesn't want to hear any of that right now. This is a point in history where the confluence of weakness across Syria, Lebanon, the Houthis, is just a perfect moment for Israel and Netanyahu to assert this and solve it for once and all. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see it ending any other way. And I thought it was interesting. There was a report a couple of days ago about them working through multi-level succession planning, as they've lost, most major number of their military leadership as well as some of their
Mm-hmm.
political figures. So, they're also looking at, what are the contingencies if other leaders are taken out. But until, we have, the 86-year-old leader exits stage right, one way or the other,
Right.
this is not going to get resolved. And that's just my kind of learned and listening to, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of having worked with the Israelis for several decades, where I think we are. And we have
Yeah.
to understand that, and that this is not just going to be, oh, we're going to drop some big bombs and it's all going to get settled. It's not.
Might want to let our president know that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, that we're in a situation where the president does not have good advisor. Well, I shouldn't say good. He doesn't have advisors around him that are willing to challenge these decisions, and talk him through what are, the potential outcomes of these decisions. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, they've been selected that way, and I think that's why we're seeing so much, kind of turmoil, and just kind of lack of understanding throughout all the government on, like, what is our plan, what is our philosophy, what are we going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, we worry about uncertainty and chaos outside. You can only imagine what it's like trying to be a government employee or manager right now, trying to
Yeah.
push things forward. So yeah, so it's and I was asked in another podcast similar to this about,
Mm-hmm.
what's a big issue that's not being talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would eclipse everything that we've discussed today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And well, my answer to that was, look, all of this, we've seen turmoil like this before, right? We've seen, you know, wars, and all, and the human race has kind of worked their way through it, and
Mm-hmm.
survived and thrived, right? We have a bigger middle class worldwide thanks to the U.S. since World War II, right? It's been amazing what we've done. What we're not talking about, and it's the proverbial, what do you call it, the boiling frog syndrome or whatever, where
Mm-hmm.
the that the governments are failing to act around the gradual negative changes of our climate. and
Mm-hmm.
and it's becoming clear and clear as you look at the data that it's becoming, too late, right?
Yeah.
So, and the thing that, I guess, what I finished on is, I'm absolutely confident as I look at the technologies that we have and the innovations that are online that will come down the road here in the next years, 5 years, that we can absolutely address climate change at scale. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is we don't have a global consensus, the US being a big part of the problem. and we're not
Mm-hmm.
investing in and implementing the solutions that we have in front of us, that we could actually knock this thing out in pretty short order. And I can only imagine, if we were to spend the trillions of dollars that we spend on wars, and say,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to suspend all wars and we're going to spend, $3 trillion on, decarbonization and all the different
Mm-hmm.
technology, battery technology, all the stuff that we have to solve this problem before it is too late, right?
Right.
So that would be kind of my closing of this session is, amidst all of the chaos, amidst all of the uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
we need to step up globally, and for the listeners here, from a US perspective, and get climate change back on the table,
Mm-hmm.
and get focused on it, because it ultimately will be eclipse anything that we're talking about short of World War III, right? So that's
Wow.
hopeful but cautionary closing for me.
Definitely a cautionary ending. Not mad at it. Well, Bruce, thank you so much, as always. I know you're such a busy guy, but where can people find you if they want to get some more of your expertise while we're on break?
Sure. I mean, I think people just, Bruce McIndoe in LinkedIn, or,
Mm-hmm.
McIndoeRiskAdvisory.com. And, I usually get a lot of inbound, and I share a lot with people.
Yeah.
My job is to try to help people understand things, but more importantly, what to do about them. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yep.
We
And
are so
always the
grateful.
World Trade Center Institute too. Right. So,
Yes, we are grateful to have you on our side. And thank you all so much for listening. Please follow us online at WTCI.org and on all social platforms at WTC Institute. And we will see you all in the fall.